Hi, my name is Malia Michael, and I'm going to be talking to you about guns, or firearms, freedom, and changing the conversation. So oftentimes, this is a very controversial topic that has either one of two sides, being very anti-gun and then being very, very pro-gun. So I just want you to picture for yourself just a regular morning. You roll over, you snooze your alarm a couple of times, at least I do, I don't know about you. But you snooze your alarm a couple times, roll over, get out of bed, put some coffee on in the kitchen, you wake your kids up, your high schooler tells you that he has a game tonight at 6, and you're like, okay, it's perfect. You send off the husband, you send off the kids, the bus drives away, and you don't think that it's any other Wednesday. It's just like any other Wednesday, until it's not. There is a very big problem in our society today, and it revolves around the gun culture. But my question to you is, excuse me, sorry, my aim is not working. Okay, so these are the most recent mass shooters in American history. You'll definitely recognize Nicholas Cruz right up at the top, down to Stephen Paddock, Omar Siddiqui Mateen, Sung Hui Chow, Adam Lanza, Devin Patrick Keeley. These are all men who woke up just like it was any other Wednesday and went up and shot up high schools, communities, bars, and with very little regard to human life. They took several lives, they took several family members. So we have handed them their weapons. America has continually failed to address this issue, but I beg to answer the question of, but will taking them away fix the problem? I will attempt to be a middle ground in this issue. So there's going to be the anti-guns and very pro-guns, and I'm going to be right on the stricter enforcement of gun laws. So without the rigorous enforcement of stricter gun laws, we continually fail to address the issue that has destroyed us from the inside out. And this is slide 8 of your PDF, if it's transferred onto Blackboard. So just for a couple key terms of clarification before we get too much farther, the Second Amendment is what America has based their gun rights on. It is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then one other thing, gun control, according to Webster's Dictionary, is the regulation of the selling, owning, and use of guns. So my proposition to you today is, through the implementation and enforcement of stricter gun laws, the number of mass shootings and the number of gun-related deaths will greatly decrease. So I'm arguing this middle ground on behalf of the mass shootings that have happened and that have continued to happen regardless of our supposed action on the matter. So what does it look like to have guns in America? Let's see here. All right. And so there has been 372 mass shootings in the area, in the country in 2017. And see here, okay, I just brought up my stats here. Killing 475 people and wounding over 1,800. The number of gun murders per capita in the U.S. is, in 2012, was nearly 30 times that of the UK. So the number of mass shootings that happened in America, 30 times the amount that happened in the UK. So in the next few minutes, I will walk you through the current environment in which we live and the facts associated, what curbing gun laws would do and how I propose we would do it, how the current argument surrounding gun control is distractive, divisive, and dangerous, and how all of this ultimately affects our youth. Right. So reason 1, America has the most mass shootings in the world. This doesn't mean that we have the highest gun violence in the world. I believe Honduras, Venezuela, and El Salvador have more gun violence, mostly associated with gangs. But America is the only one in its highest bracket of the socioeconomic status that it stands in to have this great of a divide, or great of a distinguished massive number of mass shooters. We make up for 5% of the population, but we also contribute to 35% of all global mass shooters. So for every 100 Americans, there are 89 guns. 3/4 of gun owners couldn't imagine a life without them, so it's an issue of identity. American population, again, only goes for 5%, but 31% of all global mass shooters. So this is a little chart I have for you. States with the highest and lowest gun rates. We have Louisiana as the top, Alabama, South Carolina, Arizona, and all the way down. And moving forward, this is a chart for your own benefit. This is on slide 15, in case you're keeping up with us on the PDF. And this is another graph about the rate at which the homicides and unintentional, the difference between the homicides and the suicide rate and different gun violences happen. As you can see, there's a whole lot of red down here, and that is where we stand as America in comparison to everybody else according to the same amount of population. So this is according to 1 million people. So what are our gun laws now? Just a really quick overview. That was the Second Amendment that we covered before. And here is how we got there. So in 1968, we passed a gun control act that prohibited the gun use of children, convicted criminals, the mentally disabled, dishonorable, discharged military personnel, and anyone with mental illnesses. And then there was, in 1983, the Firearm Owner Protection Act, the prohibition of the National Registry of Dealer Records, and the selling of firearms in state shows, and the selling of transferring of ammunition, so it weakens the grip on gun laws slightly. And then, as you go down, Public Safety and Recreational Farm Act, Firearms Use and Protection Act. This was the temporary law known as the Assault Weapons Ban. But this only lasted, as you can see, until 2004. And then 2008, there was a significant law passed as well. So in this what does this conclude? Is just that there's gun laws in existence today, but they are very, very inconsistent. So reason number 2 why I believe that middle ground is very important for stricter gun laws, America is torn apart by its own people. So mass shooters, again, make up a very large portion of the global, or American mass shooters make up for a large portion of global mass shooters. And so what do they look like? What are some personifications? And even though there's not a one-size-fits-all profile, there is some significant commonalities that we can't deny, of which includes white entitlement, middle-class instability, heterosexual masculinity, and downward economic mobility. So they see themselves as these macho men, and they are entitled, they feel entitled to things, but they also are experiencing some significant and tumultuous life stages that that make them feel like a failure. Of course, not every white man who feels like this is going to turn out to be a mass shooter, but these are just common characteristics that we can identify, and these are all things that that can be identified. And if you're following along in the PDFs, that's 22 out of 27, so we're almost there. This mass shooter profile also associates antisocial behavior, abuse, threatening of loved ones, and animals, sometimes violent conduct, and this is not necessarily limited to a particular belief system. And there's also almost always a personal grievance. So if someone is mourning, they're mourning if they've had previously antisocial behavior, and if they have been known to abuse or threaten their loved ones. So possible solutions on the next slide here. I I believe that the licensing background and the issuing of background checks and rigorous safety courses will help in the initial weeding out of people who don't need to have the possession of guns. So the background check will count for all mental and physical abilities, and if it'll be used for gaming purposes, and what it will be used. It'll be closely monitored throughout the owner's use, and they must record the things that they use it for. So consistent laws and enforcement of laws is very important. Increased support, aid, and training of officers to deal with gun violence and to deal with these mass shooters. So in the instance of the Florida high school shooting, that there would be police in both plain and uniform clothing, so that they can, some can be easily identified, and so that the protection of the students is known. One of the most likely things that we can do to help prevent mass shooters from going through with their action is to let them know that they won't succeed. So the presence of a uniformed police officer is important, but also the plain clothes, so they can remain relatively unnoticed, but they can also act. And this also can include people who aren't necessarily law enforcement, but they have passed similar background checks and safety gun rights, so they can carry guns on properties in which lives are at stake. And while it makes fully possible for a healthy individual to acquire a firearm, laws, both federal and state, must become more consistent. Law enforcement is given the ability to follow through. This is very important, and the elimination of gun-free zones is also very important, because currently many schools stand for this. All right, and then allowing registered parents, teachers, and administration to carry guns, and equipping high-risk areas such as schools, large community events, etc. With armed police officers. And then we limit the media coverage that we have on mass shooters, so we don't glorify or glorify the acts or glorify the horrendous loss of life. That we choose to watch and share the things that deserve to be shared. And these lives of these children matter, and that they deserve to be respected. And the final reason is America is increasingly divided. This is a very big issue that I touched on the beginning of it a little bit, but they are increasingly divided in the sides, and that is very, very dangerous for internal and external reasons. So in reason 5, I'm sorry, there's one more. America's youth are anxious, but they are motivated. So there is a rising generation, Generation Z, came up overnight after the issue of the Florida shooting, and they are very aware of the culture and the gun culture in America and the identity associated with it, and they don't want to stand by anymore. Perhaps like previous generations, they want to stand up and fight for it. And this is a very, very encouraging thing, but also a very a weighty thing as well, because it is our responsibility as older generations and as parents to younger generations still, that we create an environment that is safe, encouraging, but also very real and authentic. So by creating a middle ground, enforcing stricter gun laws, and arming those who can protect us best, and limiting the media coverage associated with mass shooters' identity, hopefully we'll be able to create a greater place for the next generation. And I believe that is all. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.